We had some surprises last week with the very first college football playoff rankings, and so obviously I've changed my projections this week to try to match what this committee seems to be doing. And again, the big changes that we saw, there's definitely a recency bias. They're definitely looking at how teams are performing now versus where they were early in the season. And then they're also looking at performance. So they're looking at how close you were in your games. Did you blow teams out? The game's close. And that's a shift from what we've seen in the past. So I'm going to give you my projections for what I think the committee is going to do this week. And then I will also show you what I believe the rankings would look like if we got the normal committee, the normal things that they would use with resume and all that. Obviously, the resume still matters, but it used to matter more, it seems like. So I'm going to give you what I think the rankings would look like, in my opinion, or how they should look, going based off of resume and all that. So first, let's get into what I believe the rankings are going to look like tomorrow night. And we will start with the bottom. So this is the bottom two teams are tough for me, but I think Cincinnati and Houston with the 2 losses, that's probably going to be enough to get them in. It's tough, though. I mean, you look at some of the other teams. First of all, Cincinnati, they've got to win over Iowa State and win over Baylor. Those are not great wins, but their losses are Nebraska and Utah. So you lost to pretty good teams. Houston lost to Texas Tech, who's going to be a top 10 team. And then West Virginia, that loss does hurt, but that team is trending up. This is a better West Virginia team than we saw earlier in the year. And remember, West Virginia also beat Pitt, so this is not a horrible team. Houston does have wins over Arizona and Arizona State, which I think are better than Cincinnati's wins, but the West Virginia loss a little bit worse. So I could see those two teams in either order. You look at other teams that could be ranked. SMU has a win over Miami, but they've got 3 losses. Is that going to be enough to get them ranked? Do they drop Missouri? What do they do with Missouri? Their quarterback's out. That's a tough one. Washington, I definitely think, drops out. And then Arizona State's another team to look at. They've got a win over Texas Tech. That's obviously a really good win. And then they have wins over TCU and Baylor. So maybe Arizona State sneaks in there. I could see that possibly. I don't really think they're going to go the group of 5 team. They didn't put James Madison in last week. And we know that they were behind Memphis, because Memphis was the team that they showed us would be in the playoff. And Memphis just lost again. And again, comparing the resumes of these group of 5 teams, I don't think that they're going to rank a group of 5 team this week if they didn't do it last week. So I think Cincinnati and Houston are those 2 teams to get in. It's hard, unless they go with one of those 3 loss teams or a group of 5 team. I think these are probably your 2 teams. Now, Iowa, I don't think Iowa really drops much, because they played a very close game against a top 10 Oregon team. And again, this committee has shown us they're looking at performance. You look at Notre Dame's losses to good teams in close games. They obviously did not penalize them much for those losses. So I think Iowa actually stays in these rankings. Tennessee, I think, kind of moves up a little bit just from some teams that lost. And then Pittsburgh's kind of in that same boat. Again, not a lot of changes with resumes this week because there weren't a lot of upsets or anything. So again, I think it's going to be pretty easy to predict this, but who knows? Maybe they'll surprise us. We go 16 through 20. Virginia and Louisville, how far do they drop? That's going to be a big question. I don't think you really go below this spot. I mean, those teams behind them, it's hard to see. Pittsburgh lost to Louisville. I know head-to-head doesn't seem to matter as much in some of these cases, but it does still matter. That's why I think USC is ahead of Michigan. I think Miami moves up to 16. Again, not a lot of drama here, in my opinion. Again, the question mark is going to be how far do Virginia and Louisville drop? This is where I think they drop. Could they drop them further? Possibly. We'll see. All right, 11 through 15. Again, it seems pretty easy here. Georgia Tech, Vandy keep moving up. Utah moves up. BYU is going to be interesting. How far do they drop them? I've got them dropping them to number 12, just ahead of Utah, because of the performance, because they got blown out against Texas Tech. If that game was close, I think BYU would still be in the top 10. And this committee, like I said, has shown us that they're really looking at the performance and how did you compete against your opponents. I think that's why BYU is going to actually drop behind some of these 2-loss SEC teams. We'll see if that's right. Again, I don't feel confident in that prediction because we haven't seen what this committee is going to do now that we've gotten the first rankings. We haven't seen how they're moving teams. So I don't feel super confident there, but that's where I believe BYU is going to be. If you're just going by resume, the resume for BYU is not great. Utah is their one good win. Then they've got a win over Arizona, a win over Iowa State. Oklahoma has a win over Michigan and Tennessee. Texas has a win over Oklahoma and Vanderbilt. So those teams both have 2 top 25 wins. That's why I think BYU does drop to number 12. Let's go now to the top 10. And Texas, I think, moves up to 10. Notre Dame up to 9. Oregon to 8. Big win for the Ducks. Texas Tech moves up to number 7. And Ole Miss to number 6. Again, there's not a lot to talk about here. The teams win and they move up. No team really had a huge, Texas Tech and Oregon had the best resume boosting wins. Was it enough to jump them ahead of Ole Miss? I don't think so. I think there was a little bit of a gap there. Although I think Texas Tech, which I'll show you in a second, should probably be ahead of Ole Miss. If you just compare those two resumes, Texas Tech has blowout wins. Keep that in mind. And they are looking at performance. So maybe Texas Tech does jump ahead of Ole Miss. But blowout wins over BYU, Utah, Houston, and Kansas. Those are potentially 3 top 25 wins if Houston is ranked. Houston was, again, we had them in that final spot. We'll see if they're ranked. But those are all blowout wins. Those are not close games. Ole Miss has wins over Oklahoma, Tulane, and LSU. That's it, and those are all close games. So I do think Texas Tech should be ahead of Ole Miss, but I don't think the committee is going to do that when you look at how Ole Miss performed against Georgia. And I think you could even make an argument for Texas Tech being ahead of Georgia and Alabama. I really do when you look at how dominant they've been in their games. But they do have that loss. That loss to Arizona State, that is a much worse loss. And I think that at the end of the day is going to be why Texas Tech comes in at number 7. The top 5 I don't think is going to change. There is a question of Texas A&M jumping ahead of Indiana. They just went and beat Missouri convincingly. Missouri does not have their starting quarterback, though, so I don't think you can give them as much credit for that win. Indiana did get a really good win, a top 25 win. Oh, no, sorry, getting the games mixed up. Thinking about Oregon. Indiana beat Penn State, so that was a close win over a pretty bad team. That, will they get penalized for that? Will we see Texas A&M ahead of Indiana? I think that's possible. But I think resume-wise, Indiana still, that win over Oregon, that's going to be the difference. I think Ohio State's clearly at number 1. But, yeah, I'm looking at Indiana, Texas A&M. Do they make a switch there? I think that's possible. And that would tell us even more that they're looking at this, what's happened recently. And, again, we know there's a recency bias. That would tell us that it's a big one. So this is a big week here to see how they're going to adjust teams. And so how do I think the rankings should look? In my opinion, if they use the old criteria, which I don't know if it's still on the website. I guess they probably changed it because it doesn't seem like they're using it, but they have their criteria, which is really based off of resume. And it's not so much about, winning margin and things like that. This is how I think the committee would have ranked the teams in past years. So this is how I think the rankings should look. Again, if you're going with that formula. Ohio State's still at 1, Indiana still at 2, Texas A&M at 3, Alabama, Georgia. But I do think Texas Tech should be at 6. I think their resume is just much better than Ole Miss. I think BYU should still be at 9. They've only got 1 loss. I actually think Utah's resume is better than Texas and Oklahoma. So I'd actually have BYU at 9, Utah at 10, then Texas, Oklahoma. I still think Miami and Notre Dame, you look at their resumes, they're very similar. Miami beat them head-to-head. I still believe Miami should be ranked ahead of Notre Dame. Now, do I think if they played now, who's playing better? Yeah, Notre Dame's playing better. And this new way of ranking teams is probably better for getting us the best teams in the playoff and the best matchups, because you do want the teams that have trended up, that are playing better. These are not the same teams that played in September. So I actually kind of like the way they're ranking teams, but again, I'm just giving you what I think they should do if they use the normal criteria. Vanderbilt 15, USC, Michigan, Georgia Tech, Virginia, Louisville, Cincinnati, Houston, Pittsburgh, James Madison. I think, again, with 1 loss to a top 25 team, they've done enough. And I've actually got Arizona State as that 3-loss team that gets into these rankings. I don't think it should be Tennessee. I think it should be Arizona State, because I think who you beat has to matter. And Arizona State beat Texas Tech. This is a top 10 win. I think that's enough. And then TCU and Baylor are pretty good wins as well. I think that's enough to get to where Arizona State should be ranked, again, based off of resume. Utah and Houston, those are our top 25 teams that they lost to. And then the loss to Mississippi State in a very close game that they could have won on the road early in the season. So that's how I think the rankings should look based off of the old criteria. Again, it seems like there's a new criteria this year, and I'm not complaining. I'm not saying this is right and the new way is wrong. I'm just wanted to throw this out there and give you how I'd rank the teams, again, based off of pretty much just resume. So give me your thoughts on the rankings and how you think they're going to look. Let me know what you think down in the comments below.